Welcome to the You, Me, and BTC podcast. This special episode, number 30, was created with Bitcoin beginners in mind. Of course, we hope even the experts will enjoy it, but in today's show, we'll be discussing lots of Bitcoin basics. We didn't want to try this alone, however, because we already know quite a bit about cryptocurrency, and explanations that seem simple to us might be tough for any newbies out there. That's why we called in an actual Bitcoin beginner to ask questions anytime we got too technical. Over the next hour, we'll be speaking with our guest of honor, Winter Trabex. Until this recording, he had only heard about Bitcoin and had never gotten too involved. He will have plenty of great questions for us, and we will do our best to answer them. What is the blockchain? How do you mine Bitcoin? What are the best ways to buy it? Stay tuned for all that and more. Your hosts today are just John Stewart and myself, Daniel Brown. Here we go. Welcome, everybody. This is the You, Me, and BTC podcast again. We are getting started with episode 30. That's 30 sounds like a pretty big number. We're glad we made it this far. And we have an interesting episode lined up today. We are sitting down with Winter Trabex. He is a Bitcoin beginner, and that's something interesting. We've had this idea for a while to get a beginner on the show because it can be hard to explain Bitcoin. You know, if we tried to explain it ourselves, we might miss things that a beginner would ask questions about. We might not explain it very well. So our goal is kind of to try to explain Bitcoin to Winter, and anytime he has a question, he can just chime in, and hopefully, I mean, obviously he doesn't represent every single beginner out there, but in general, he's going to ask questions that other beginners might have too, and so yeah, we're just going to do our best to explain it and let Winter chime in anytime that he feels is necessary. So real quick, I'll say, Winter, thanks for joining us again, and I'm also here with John Stewart.
Hello there.
Hey. So before we get into all that, though, we wanted to do a quick plug for Liberty.me, because that's actually the way that we met Winter. Well, I did anyway, is in the chat room at Liberty.me, and it's a really cool service that I've just started to get into and learn how to use and stuff. So we wanted to just talk about it for a little bit, tell you what it is, how it works, and how you can join. And we actually have a discount that we can get you too. So basically, if you don't know, Liberty.me is a fairly new social network that is liberty-oriented. Now, if you've listened to the show before, you know that John and I, and Tim, our other co-host, who's actually not with us today. I don't know, we've never done a show with just me and John, but anyway, yeah, the three of us are fairly liberty-oriented, which, yeah, that's kind of a big thing in the Bitcoin world, too. Like, a lot of people are liberty-oriented in the Bitcoin world. But we really love this website, and actually, by the time you're hearing this, we will have released an interview with Jeffrey Tucker, who is kind of the creator, one of the founders of Liberty.me. And so you'll want to listen to that interview too. He explains it pretty well in there. But yeah, and actually, since we met Winter at Liberty.me, I'll let you jump in here too. What do you think of Liberty.me?
Okay, so I've been a member of Liberty.me for about 2 months now. I haven't regretted paying their monthly fee of $14. You can get books, you can engage in classes, you can look at videos, you can talk with other liberty-minded people, you can write articles, you can sit and lurk if you want to do that. If you want to pay $14 a month to sit and lurk on a site, you totally can. There's so much to the site. It's amazing how much there is, really. I am so impressed with it.
Right, yeah, there's literally, I remember in the interview, Jeffrey Tucker was telling us that he has something like 20 plus bits of widgetry, I think is what he called them. But I think what he meant by that is kind of, you have the forums, you have the chat, you have guides, you have Liberty Me University, which is like they do classes every night. There is all kinds of stuff on here. There's a list of events, a calendar that you can keep track of Liberty-oriented events and stuff like that. And that's just scratching the surface. There's all kinds of stuff in here. There's news, whatever you want to do, it's on there. So, yeah, I agree. It's definitely a great opportunity to get involved. And like we said, the Bitcoin community and the Liberty community are fairly well connected. They're not identical. They're not exactly the same. There are plenty of people in Bitcoin who aren't exactly for Liberty or things like that. But, it's definitely worth checking out. There is a Bitcoin section of the forums if you're interested in that. So, yeah, if you want to try it, you can get your first 30 days is free. Just if you want to try it, see what it's like, you can do that. 30 days for free. We have a redirect set up at umeandbtc.com/liberty if you want to get there. And also, when you do sign up, we can get you $5 off for your subscription. So the code for that is YMB. That's for you, me, and BTC. Use the code YMB to get $5 off, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. We hope it's beneficial for you. And they're still in the beta phase too, so there's definitely going to be lots of updates and changes that are constantly rolling out because it's only a few months old. It was released pretty recently. So yeah, check that out. umeandbtc.com/liberty and the promo code YMB. Sweet. Anyway, so I guess we're ready to jump into explaining Bitcoin with a beginner right next to us. It's not the easiest thing to do, but we're going to give it a shot. I don't know, where should we start? John, do you want to just take it away, see if you can give it, just see what you can do? And then, yeah, like we said, Winter, anytime, literally, anytime we say a word that you don't understand, stop us, ask us, anything at all. Please jump in as much as you can, because anything that you think is probably being thought by someone in the audience, a beginner or something like that at the same time. So jump in as much as possible. You want to give it a shot, John?
Yeah, and don't be afraid to interrupt me while I'm talking. It's fine. So I'm not gonna try to explain all the technical stuff because Dan's gonna be able to do it a lot better than me. And yeah, that's just not my area of expertise. So I guess I'm just gonna talk about Bitcoin more ideologically or philosophically, I guess. So, like, I think the main idea behind Bitcoin, maybe I'm overstating this, calling it the main idea, but is that it's a decentralized currency. So, if you listen to the last podcast we did, we talked about fractional reserve and reserve banking. That is a centralized system. So, Bitcoin is decentralized, which means no one institution controls the money system. It's completely peer-to-peer. And so I guess you would say that everybody controls a little piece of the whole system instead of one institution or person or company or bank controlling it. And I think that is the main idea behind Bitcoin. The reason that's important is because, well, as Dan was just saying, everyone on the show is pretty into liberty, and that's actually a really big, important debate, I guess, over liberty, is the centralized systems of banking that we currently have, because it essentially takes away freedoms, your economic freedoms, because your money, what happens with your money is not totally determined by you. I mean, on a daily basis, most people probably feel like they have control of their money. I mean, you can go to Walmart and pull out a $5 bill and pay for whatever, like a stick of deodorant or something, I don't know, a toothbrush, whatever it is. So most people maybe they don't notice that they don't have complete control over what's happening with their money. And that's kind of something that we would like to see fixed, but that's a really huge issue. So in a situation like that, what people are not really noticing is the way banks run, the way the Federal Reserve System is run, is that banks actually like print money. Well, not banks. The mint like prints money, and I'm just gonna say that the final outcome of this, I'm not gonna go into specifics, is that there's inflation and things like that. Which I guess that's another important point about Bitcoin. With paper money, you can just print an infinite supply of it, and Bitcoin actually has scarcity. There's a cap, which is roughly 21 million Bitcoins. Yeah, that's like a pretty close estimate of what it will be. But that's also important too, because scarcity creates value, which helps combat the inflation that I was just talking about. So like your money, when it gets inflated, it loses value. And Bitcoin, it was designed to not do that. And that's where the decentralized aspect of it and the scarcity comes in. And also, with it being decentralized, it allows you a lot more privacy than being in a regular banking system will. I mean, if you're just using cash, you can be pretty private with that, but there are a lot of limitations with cash. Like, you can't trade it over the internet. I mean, I guess you could, like, do it on a chat room and then send somebody cash in the mail, but that's pretty risky and probably not the best way to do things. So, yeah, that's maybe a third important point about Bitcoin, is that it's done electronically, which means that it's basically instant. There are block times, so it's basically like 10 minutes before a transaction is actually verified, but it's basically instant. You can trade it anywhere, and there's no holds or anything like that that's going to happen. You just send somebody money and they'll get it, and it's not going through anybody else's hands because it's peer-to-peer. And both of you decide how much money is getting transferred because it's decentralized. Nobody else has any say in what the money's worth or how much goes between you two. It's just a fast, pretty anonymous. It's not completely anonymous, and we talk about that a lot, but it gives you a fair degree of anonymity. It's fast, peer-to-peer, fairly anonymous, and decentralized. So I guess those are kind of the big ideological points behind Bitcoin. Does that sound pretty good to you, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. Fast, yeah, that's definitely true, just because it's on the internet, and the internet is in general pretty fast. Peer-to-peer, that's definitely true. That's kind of decentralized. Yeah, I think those are definitely good ways to put it. Any questions so far, Winter?
Well, I could talk about the Federal Reserve and fiat currency. I know a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely, go for it.
See, the one thing about fiat currency is that the government controls it all. They can inflate it whenever they want. And so what happens is when you work at a job where you're getting paid money, even though your paycheck is the same amount every year, when the dollar decreases in value, what happens is your labor is actually worth less as the years go along.
That's actually, I'd never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. Your wages are going to be worth less as inflation continues.
Yeah, that's really good, and that actually made me think of another thing that we should probably say, is because it's decentralized, it's actually, you could say it's a consensus-based system. So really, the money is worth what everybody who's trading says it's worth. It's not based on what the government does or what the banks do or like anything like that. It's just like, I'm going to trade you this much for this much, and we agree on that. So and it's all consensus of the whole network, which is obviously important to the concept of liberty, because, you know, there's the non-aggression principle and there's no force or coercion, which in a centralized system where other people are telling you, this is what money you're going to use and this is how much it's worth. And if we change our minds, you have to just agree with it and go with it, or else you're not going to have any money.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I wanted to say something too about inflation with Bitcoin, because a lot of people sort of miss this point, and I think it's pretty important to mention this to a beginner as well. Right now, there actually is inflation with Bitcoin, because at the moment, there's only, I think, like 13 or 14 million Bitcoins in existence. But we keep talking about this 21 million number because every 10 minutes, brand new Bitcoins are being mined. They're being created, brought out of thin air. Every 10 minutes, or roughly 10 minutes, whenever a block is mined, there are brand new coins included in that block. So everyone says it's deflationary, and it essentially it will be, at least eventually, because we'll hit that cap, and then yes, it will no longer will there be new coins appearing, and the inflation will either it will stop entirely or it will be negligible. I think it's more kind of asymptotic. I think we will never actually go to zero coins being created. It will just be such a tiny number that it's negligible. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that there actually is inflation right now with Bitcoin, because, I mean, the main reason is just because, well, the coins initially, they have to be distributed somehow. If Satoshi just gave all 21 million to himself to start with and then tried to hand them out and share them around or whatever, that would be really bad. And that actually happens with some of the altcoins that pop up. They get pre-mined by the creators and they try to make a buck off of it or something like that. But no, right now, the coins are still being created. They're still being distributed among the miners who are using the coins. And I think that's just an important point to make because a lot of people don't realize that. They think it's 100% deflationary, or they think there is no inflation. And that's not 100% true. And actually, I think it's actually a really good sign that Bitcoin has done so well in spite of inflation. Even though there are all these new coins entering the market every day, the price has still done very well. It's still gone up. It's still stayed high. And that, I think, is actually a really good sign, because eventually the block reward is going to get cut in half within, I think, the next year or two. And so there will be less coins entering the market, and that will cause the price to either stay very stable or continue to rise, both of which are good things.
Well, yeah, it's like, yeah, there's inflation, but then why do we see the price continuing to go up? Well, I think if you look at it, well, if you think about the adoption curve, right, the bell curve, where it goes up, everybody's seen the bell curve, right? I hope. If not, look it up, because you should probably know about it. So yeah, the adoption curve is the bell curve, and I think we're still on the left-hand side of it where we're going up. So I think what we're kind of experiencing with the price of Bitcoin going up is that as there is inflation now, well, there is inflation, but it gets harder and harder to mine as more people are using it. So the actual amount of inflation that's happening is decreasing, even though there's still an inflation. I guess the percentage of inflation is decreasing, but the demand is going up. So as the inflation due to more coins being mined gets less and less, there's more and more demand. And demand also figures into the value of something as much as supply does. So I don't even know if you could necessarily call that inflation. I mean, I guess it is, but it depends on whether you're talking, I don't know, in a vacuum, I guess it would be inflation. But because we have demand, and because there are still a lot of people who haven't adopted it yet, if the supply is growing while the number of users is also growing,
right,
the percentage, I guess everybody's piece of the market share doesn't necessarily change. I mean,
right.
It's not a perfect world, so things aren't going to stay the same. It's going to shift a little bit. But so if one new user comes for every Bitcoin that is mined, and everybody has one Bitcoin. Now, obviously, it doesn't work like that. But if every day there's another Bitcoin mined, and every day there's a new user, that's not really inflation, because it has the same amount of scarcity, I guess.
Right. Some people define inflation as an increase in the money supply, and that's what is happening.
Yeah.
But another way of defining it is a rise in prices. And that's not happening with Bitcoin. I mean, the price of one Bitcoin is rising, but the price of a gallon of milk in Bitcoin or the price of coffee in Bitcoin is going down. All those prices, as the value of a Bitcoin rises, the prices of things in Bitcoin would go down. And that's the type of inflation that we don't have, because prices are going down in Bitcoin, not going up in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I just wanted to make that point is all.
So, Winter, we've been talking about mining and about the block reward and stuff a little bit. How much do you know about that? And, well, I guess I'm going to explain it anyway, but yeah, go ahead.
I tried to do it last year with my computer, but it was so complicated, I couldn't even understand it.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and give that a little bit of a shot, just explaining the basics of what mining is, why mining exists and such. And again, jump in any time. So yeah, a lot of people say that mining is not the best thing to explain to beginners just because it is so complicated and a little bit confusing. And that's kind of true, but it's still a very integral part of the Bitcoin network. So I at least want to give it a shot. And again, yeah, ask questions anytime. Basically, what the miners do is, I guess you could call it, they process the transactions. They accept any transaction that gets broadcast to the network, and they put it into a block, which gets added to the Bitcoin blockchain. And I guess at a very basic level, that's all they do. They take transactions and they put them in the blockchain. But obviously, there's a lot more behind it than that.
What is a blockchain? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's actually another very core part of Bitcoin, and that's a good question. The blockchain is the record of every single transaction that anyone has ever put on, or that anyone has ever created or transacted in Bitcoin. And it's a publicly available ledger, meaning that anybody can get the blockchain. They can download the blockchain. They can look it up on the internet. There's a couple blockchain explorers that are great out there. And all of that information is actually public, which to some people, they're like, well, hey, wait a second. I don't want all my transactions public. And that's true. We don't exactly want all of our transactions public, except that it's not necessarily linked to your name. The transactions are listed according to a Bitcoin address, which the only way that anybody could link a Bitcoin address to you personally is if you posted it online somewhere or told someone or made it clear that this was my Bitcoin address. So yeah, anyway, whenever a transaction happens, it goes from one address to another Bitcoin address, and that transaction gets put into the blockchain. And part of the reason that this is so useful, this public ledger, this history of transactions, is because it makes the entire Bitcoin economy auditable. That's a hard word to say. It is able to be audited. You can look through the entire blockchain. You wouldn't really want to do this by hand. You would want to have a program do it. But you can see where are all the Bitcoins. You can make sure that there are the right number of Bitcoins. You can make sure that extra Bitcoins have not been randomly created by somebody who hacked it or whatever. It's because it's a publicly available ledger, and it builds on top of itself. So in the first block, there was a transaction. The first 50 Bitcoins that were ever created, they went to Satoshi Nakamoto. And those Bitcoins can kind of be traced through the blockchain as he spent them or whatever he did with them. Or maybe he never spent them. Maybe they're still sitting at that same address. But any time that a transaction happens, like say, a couple blocks later in block 10, if Satoshi wanted to send those original Bitcoins to another address, he could broadcast that transactions. They would go from one address to another in block 10, and then blocks continue to get added to the blockchain. And then maybe later in block 20, some of those coins get spent again. Well, because it's all a public ledger, because it's all cryptographically verifiable, you can make sure that the coins are never like split. They're never double spent. They're never sent to two people at once, and then both people think they have the coins. That's not possible with Bitcoin. With the dollar or with any fiat currency, I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully somebody doesn't send Bitcoin to one bank account and send it to another bank account at the same time. And maybe generally we could trust the systems to not really let that happen, but there's no way that you can just look that up on a blockchain. There's no way that you can just see all the transactions and make sure that those coins or those dollars weren't duplicated. But with Bitcoin, you can do that. Sorry, I just kind of rambled. I don't know. Does that all make sense?
So, if Bitcoin is primarily transacted between two people, what happens if, let's say, you give 50 Bitcoin to somebody to invest in their company, and this person is supposed to pay you back, but they don't? How do you deal with that between the two of you? How do you resolve that situation when someone's not paying you money that they owe you?
That's a really, really good question. And the answer is, I think, you pretty much can't, except between the two of you. And that's actually something that we want. That's another kind of important thing with Bitcoin is you're right. There are no chargebacks. You can't go to the Bitcoin president and say, hey, he didn't give me my money back. Can you reverse this transaction? It can't really be done. So, like you said, the only way is just between the two of you. You have to go to him and say, hey, this is my money. You didn't pay it back. You ought to pay it back. And either he will or maybe he won't. That's a real thing with Bitcoin, is that there are no chargebacks. He would have to create a brand new transaction out of his own will, and he would have to send the money back to you out of his own will. And some people see that as a bad thing. Well, what happens if he doesn't pay me back? What happens if I send money to the wrong person? And those situations are real. They can exist. They happen probably quite a bit. But the reason we still like it is because it forces people to be more responsible. It forces you to say, hey, I'm not just going to randomly send my money to people. I'm going to look into this guy. I'm going to see if he has any feedback, any ratings, any reviews. I'm going to see what he's done in the past. I'm going to make sure that he's trustworthy. I'm going to make sure that he's going to pay me my money back. And that's the only way I'm going to send money to him or lend him money or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say this exact same thing before you started saying it. It was exactly what I was thinking. It's like, it's a trustless system. The only person you have to trust is yourself. And like you said, some people see that as a bad thing. I think a lot of people these days tend to be maybe a little bit lazy with their money, and I don't necessarily blame them. It's kind of just how our system has developed. But it's like, you just put it in a bank, and if somebody steals your credit card or whatever, well, you just call the bank and say, hey, somebody did this, and they're like, all right, we'll refund you, and we'll charge back all the purchases and stuff. And you kind of like get a do-over, but it doesn't teach people to be responsible. So yeah, it can be really scary to think that you could get screwed for that. But I mean, if you think back, like in the Old West, if you paid somebody for something and they didn't give it to you, like it was pistols at dawn. You didn't like call up the bank and be like, hey, I want this money back because this guy ripped me off. And like Dan was saying, you can find out if things are trustworthy. And if somebody does screw you, say you invest in somebody's company and they don't pay you back, well, if you start going on internet forums and trashing them and telling everybody what happened, they might pay you just to shut up. So it's just, you have to take control of situations yourself. So you can't get a bank to just like force this guy to give you back your money or whatever. You can't go to the feds or anything like that. But there are things you can do. You just have to take initiative and be responsible with your own money.
Right, and one kind of system that I think would sprout up in a truly free market, and you still couldn't force them to send the money back, but you could go to, I don't know, like an insurance agency or some sort of arbiter some sort of voluntary, contract enforcer maybe. You could sign an agreement voluntarily, the both of you could. And then if they don't pay you your money back, you can go to, well, if you insured the investment, then you could just go to the insurance company and say, hey, he didn't pay me back, therefore you owe me the money. And, if an insurance company wanted to do that, they could insure your investment or whatever. Or if it was kind of a contract arbitration system, then that would be a good place to leave a bad rating. The contract arbitration company, could just kind of keep this in their records that this guy doesn't really keep his agreements. Or they could go after him and say, hey, we had this agreement, or you two had this agreement kind of handled by us. You didn't keep your end of the agreement. Are you going to do it or aren't you? They could kind of go after him. They still couldn't force him to send the money, but it would be one way to kind of encourage that, keep everybody accountable, things like that.
Yeah, you can also have an escrow service too, which that brings in another dimension, because then you have to be sure that the escrow that you're using is trustworthy.
Actually, that is a really good point, and I actually, this is a way that these contract arbiters could actually, this is a really good thing to explain. Here, I'm going to go ahead. There is a certain kind of Bitcoin address, which is still kind of being developed, all the software around this and everything, but there are ways to do it right now. It's called an M of N address. Well, it's actually called a pay to script. It's a little technical. I'm not going to explain how it all works, but the point is, the M of N means like 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 6 or really any numbers you want to. The most common is a 2 out of 3 address, so I'll explain what that is. If I send money to a 2 out of 3 Bitcoin address, there are actually 3 different private keys behind that address. There are 3 different people maybe, or one person who keeps 3 keys in different places. And in order to spend those Bitcoins, he needs 2 out of the 3 private keys. So if it's 3 different people, if 2 of them agree to send money from this address, they can do that with even if the third person doesn't. Before I explain how that's relevant, does that all make sense, Winter?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's a 2 out of 3 address, but really you can do it with any number. But the one really useful way to use those addresses is exactly in the situation you mentioned, Winter. If I'm lending money to this person, I can make a 2 out of 3 address that includes me, it includes the contract arbiter, and it includes the person I'm lending money to. So he'll get the 50 Bitcoins, and he can only spend those Bitcoins if the contract arbiter agrees that, that it's in line with the contract or whatever. Or if I do. If I agree and he agree, then we can send the coins. Or if he and the contract arbiter agree, then they can spend the coins. So what happens is, basically, as long as whoever's in charge of the contract, as long as they're trustworthy as well, which again, you're going to have rating agencies, you're going to have feedback, and there's going to be ways to know if you can trust whoever's in charge of this contract. But yeah, as long as that person's trustworthy, then suppose that he never pays you back. Suppose that, well, actually, no, that's not really, he can't run away with the coins because he can't spend the coins unless either you or the contract arbiter agrees. I really hope arbiter is a word. I keep using it, and it sounds weird, but I guess it's a word. Okay.
Yeah, you're using it correctly.
Anyway, so yeah, if he decided not to send you the money back, well, then you can just create a transaction with your private key and with the contract arbiter's private key, and that's 2 out of the 3, and you can get the money sent back to an address that only you control. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that's kind of the escrow system that John was talking about, because the money is voluntarily entrusted with this kind of third party in between. If that's what you want to do, that's doable. You're listening to the You, Me, and BTC podcast. We need your help. First of all, we'd love it if you could check out our website, youmeandbtc.com. There you can find donation addresses for every single article and episode, and we'd love it if you could make use of those. We could also use some fans and followers, so if you're willing, please visit Facebook or Twitter.com/youmeandbtc. Lastly, remember to subscribe to the show. You can do that on iTunes or sign up on our website to receive email updates. Thanks for your support.
One of the major obstacles I've been finding is that most people, they only can trade their labor in order to get currency, and there's not really businesses that are accepting, or I should say, giving out Bitcoin right now. And this is one of the problems I'm finding.
That's a really, really good thing to bring up, because we've encouraged this on the show before. Is yeah, like you said, just working for Bitcoin, trading your labor for Bitcoin, because so many people think that they have to make it an investment kind of financially. I mean, I guess even if you're trading your labor for Bitcoin, that's still kind of an investment. But people think they have to treat it like a stock or something where they're buying it and they're just hoping the value goes up. And that has been useful. I mean, we've seen that happen, and it's been great for our Bitcoin to gain value, but there's no guarantee that that's always going to be the case. And so unless you have a ton of extra money, we generally only encourage people to put extra money into Bitcoin, only money that they can afford to lose. And so what we say instead is one of the best ways to get Bitcoin is just to work for it. On the internet, you could write for Bitcoin. There's a lot of people who do graphic design for Bitcoin. There are ways to get Bitcoin other than just buying it, which a lot of people don't realize. So that's kind of the starting point. But you were asking, well, how do you get that kind of into a whole economy, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, this is kind of a problem right now. The problem is that like we've said earlier, we still haven't reached full-scale adoption, and we need more companies to start adopting Bitcoin, more companies that are going to hire people and be able to pay them in Bitcoin. The only one I can think of right now is like antiwar.com. I know they pay their employees in Bitcoin if they want it. But yeah, it's a problem with employers right now, and that's an adoption problem.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's about adoption. And so basically, I think the answer to your question is that it will just take time for everything to make the shift and move into Bitcoin. I heard BitPay pays 10 employees completely 100% in Bitcoin, which is awesome, I think. But even there are also companies that pay, maybe 10% of the salary gets paid in Bitcoin. And we said, I think fairly recently in one of our episodes, we were saying how one of the best ways to measure Bitcoin, I guess adoption, but also not just how many people are using Bitcoin, but how effective it is maybe, or how much it's really penetrating the economy, is to measure these percentages. Well, like what percentage of people's salary is usually in Bitcoin, or what percentage of Bitcoin income are these companies keeping in Bitcoin, and what percentage of it are they selling off into dollars? And we have seen those percentages rise. Like we said, there are now 10 people for BitPay that are taking full Bitcoin salaries. So that's really good. But we've also seen that companies are Overstock keeps 10% of their Bitcoin income. They keep 10% of that in Bitcoin. Now the rest of it, they have no choice. They have to sell it for dollars or fiat or whatever to buy more products. But we're going to see those percentages rise, and we're going to see kind of the Bitcoin could create its own complete flow where we use dollars less and less. Bitcoin jobs become more available. Salaries are more in Bitcoin and less in dollars. Companies use higher percentages of Bitcoin and less dollars as well. Yeah, like John said, it's just going to take time for all of that adoption to take place. Does that make sense?
So, is there anything government can do to stop Bitcoin from spreading as much as it would and taking over their own currency?
That's a really good question, and pretty much like the answer usually is with government. Force. They could force people to use their own fiat currencies, which I guess is what they already do. That's why it's called a fiat currency, is because they force people to use it. I don't think that's going to be very effective. I think they'll try. If it ever gets that dangerous, if it ever gets that bad, they're going to say, hey, you have to use dollars, because if you don't use dollars, everything's going to fall apart. And yeah, some people are going to obey. Some people aren't. I think in the long run, it's not going to be very effective. But yeah, they're going to try to force people to use their fiat currency. Do you agree, John?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm gonna quote Jason King from our interview, Jason King of Sean's Outpost. He said trying to put regulations on Bitcoin is like trying to hold a gun to the head of algebra. It's just like it doesn't really work. The problem is, if people let you control them, it doesn't matter how good your system is. It doesn't matter how good the programming or the protocol is. The protocol, the government can't really. They can't control the protocol. Like, it is what it is. It's numbers and it's math, and it's built into the. I think it was maybe Rob Michael who was talking about that. It's like built into the fabric of the universe. Like, you can't change math, but the government can try to control people. And if somebody's using Bitcoin and they're letting the government control them, well, then practically, then yes, the government has a control over it. So we just have to not let that happen.
Yeah, definitely. I agree 100% there. It's up to the people, and that's kind of a big thing with Bitcoin is you control your own money. So if you want to obey the government, then that's up to you. If you want to be free, that's up to you as well. Yeah, so anything else, again, before I try and finish up with mining, which I should do quickly?
I don't have any more questions, if you got anything else.
Okay, yeah, so again, it's not a very easy thing to explain, but I'll do my best with mining. What the miners do is they put the transactions into this blockchain, which I think we've explained well enough, I guess. But the reason that it's so useful is because of the way they do their encryption. I'm going to try not to get too technical again, but there's a difficulty level with mining. So basically, the miners, the more people that mine, the higher the difficulty is, and it gets harder and harder to mine. Well, who cares? What does that mean? What that does is makes it more difficult for anyone to overwrite the blockchain, maybe. It makes it more difficult for any one person to kind of recreate the blockchain. And that's a difficult thing to explain. Well, how could you recreate the blockchain? Well, what happens is, as people mine, the blocks get broadcast to the network, and let's say two people are mining for the same block. One of them finds the block, and it starts broadcasting, but somebody all the way on the other side of the network also finds the block, and that starts broadcasting. Well, now there's two blocks at the same height. Like, there might both be block number 50 because one person found it and then another person found it before they knew that the other person found it, just because maybe it didn't get sent across the network fast enough. And so there's two block number 50s. Well, how do you know which one's right? Because they might both have slightly different transactions. Some of them might include this group of transactions, and the other block might include a different group of transactions. That's fine. That can happen because miners can choose which transactions to accept or not. And the way that it gets decided which block is kind of the right one, which one gets included in the blockchain, is you see which one gets to block 51 first. So if block number, we'll call it 50A and 50B, if somebody finds block number 51 on top of 50A, then 50A becomes the real one in the blockchain and 50B gets discarded. It's called an orphaned block. If 51 gets built on top of 50B, then 50B becomes the real blockchain block and 50A gets discarded. Before I move on, does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, cool. So the reason that the difficulty matters is because if the mining difficulty was always really easy, if anybody could mine blocks as much as they wanted, then somebody could just, I guess, one single miner, whoever had the most hashing power, even if it was only 10%, if one person had 10% of the hashing power and everybody else had 1%, then whoever had 10% could just create blocks really, really fast, and they could put in whatever blocks they wanted. Or the worst thing that could happen is they could put a block in their chain, and basically they have no competition because everyone else is at 1%. And then, so they could say, hey, I sent you 100 Bitcoins. I bought whatever I bought from you. So that transaction goes through. And then they could back up. They could go from, let's say that 100 Bitcoins got sent in block 50. So whoever's receiving it says, oh, cool, it's in block 50. I got my 100 Bitcoins. Awesome. But if somebody had enough hashing power, what they could do is they could back up to block 49. They could build a new block 50 that does not include that transaction, and they could kind of erase that transaction because they could build a new block 50 without that transaction and just go on from there as fast as they wanted. That's kind of how a double spend attack would work. So I feel like I'm going on and I'm rambling a lot.
Oh, see, this is all so fascinating. I've never heard anything like this before.
Okay. Well, so what the difficulty does is basically makes it so that the more people that are mining, the more difficult it gets to mine. And so the difficulty adjusts automatically such that a block is found roughly every 10 minutes. I think it's about every 2 weeks, I think, that the difficulty gets retargeted and the difficulty level gets adjusted. Usually it goes up because usually there's more miners that enter the network. But it could also go down if, for some reason, if miners left the network, if there was less hashing power, then the difficulty level could go down. But yeah, it adjusts such that a block is found roughly every 10 minutes. But that's also a little bit based on luck because these encryption algorithms are, to some degree, they are random. So it is possible that a block could be found, I don't know, theoretically 10 blocks could be found in 1 minute. I mean, that's based on probability, that's essentially impossible, but that's theoretically possible. Or we've also seen, actually it was just a few weeks ago, I remember seeing that there was no block found, I think for an hour maybe or more. And that can happen occasionally, just based on luck, basically, based on statistics or whatever. It's like flipping a coin. You could flip heads 10 times in a row. It's unlikely, but yeah, it could happen, and it does happen occasionally. So that's kind of how the difficulty works. That's kind of how the difficulty retargets.
How do I mine Bitcoin?
Okay.
How do I get into that?
Really good question. So originally, the way mining was supposed to work in the really early stages was that basically everyone would be a miner. Everyone could just mine on their computer. I think in the original clients, the original Bitcoin wallets, there was just a button that you could click. I think it was called Generate Coins. And all you had to do was, in your wallet, you just had to click Generate Coins, and you would be mining. And you may or may not find some, whatever, depending on what the difficulty was, depending on how fast your computer was. Anybody was basically a miner. But what happened was people realized that graphics cards made a whole lot better miners than CPUs. And so they created specialized software that would utilize your graphics card to do a whole bunch of Bitcoin mining a whole lot faster. And so people with graphics cards put a whole lot more mining power into the network, and that made the difficulty go up. Just like we talked about, there was a whole lot more mining power, so the difficulty went up. Well, if the difficulty is higher, at some point it's going to make it almost impossible to find a block with a CPU, with a regular computer chip. And that eventually that did happen. It became essentially worthless to mine with your computer because there were so many graphics cards out there mining a whole lot more efficiently than CPUs. And so that's, at some point, the option to just generate coins with your computer was completely removed because it was pointless and worthless. And then what happened, the exact same transition happened. We went from CPUs to graphics cards, and then what people did was they created these things called ASICs. It's ASIC, which stands for Application Specific Integrated Chip. And what that is it's a piece of hardware called a miner, I guess, and it is specifically designed to do nothing other than mine for Bitcoins. It's application specific. The application that it is specifically designed for is Bitcoin mining. And the exact same transition happened. All these ASICs added a whole lot more power to the network. The difficulty went way up, and it made regular graphics cards obsolete. Now you can't really mine with a graphics card. You're not really going to make any money. It's not even worth it. So your question was, how do you get involved in mining? At this point, with these huge developments and with all this expensive hardware, it's really, really difficult to do it and to be sure that you're going to make money. We did it with a really simple Butterfly Labs box a while back. It makes hardly anything anymore, even though that was an ASIC, but it was one of the first generation ASICs, and it makes virtually nothing anymore. But basically, what's going to happen if you try to buy an ASIC right now? They're available. You can pre-order them, or you can order some that are already out there and available. You could order one, but I think it's going to be really hard to make your money back. If you wanted to do it just for fun, sure, do some shopping, buy an ASIC. It's not super difficult to find a tutorial online. Really, you're just going to have to plug it into your computer and let it run a program 24/7. It's not too hard to set up as long as you know how to follow a step-by-step instructions. So I guess that's the answer. If you wanted to get into mining yourself, that's how you would do it. I don't think it would be very profitable, but you could try it just for fun.
Okay, so even with mining being as expensive as it is to get into, isn't it possible if you mine today and save up your Bitcoins that you'll make money in the long run?
Right. That's another thing that's worth mentioning. Well, real quick, I want to also say that another option is cloud-hosted mining, where you basically just pay a company to host a miner for you, and you'll get regular payouts every week or whatever. That's a pretty similar thing where I think it's going to be pretty hard for that to be profitable, but there are companies out there that do that, and you don't have to get any hardware, you don't have to run anything. You basically just pay a company to mine for you, and you can look that up too if you want to. But yeah, let's go back to mining profitability in the future. So it is true that the value of the Bitcoin could rise. So let's say you put $100, and now ASICs are a lot more expensive, but just to make things simple, let's say you bought an ASIC for $100. And let's say that ASIC mined over time, let's say it mined 1/10 of a Bitcoin. So right now, 1/10 of a Bitcoin is worth about $60. So initially you could say, oh, I didn't make a profit, I lost $40, whatever. But like you said, Winter, you're right. The value of the Bitcoin could, let's say it doubles. Well, then your 1/10 of a Bitcoin is now worth $120, and you made a $20 profit. that can happen. That's really cool, and that would be great. But let's think about that for a second. You put $100 in, the value of the Bitcoin doubled, and you got $120 out? That doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you just buy the Bitcoin for $100? The value of the Bitcoin doubles, and then you get $200 out, right? So you're right, that could happen, and personally, I would say that might probably happen and might help a lot of miners out. But when you think about it, it's probably more profitable to just buy the Bitcoin instead of the miner and to let your Bitcoin appreciate instead of hoping that whatever you mine will appreciate.
So how do I buy Bitcoin? Like, is there a market for it, or how does that work?
Perfect. Another amazing question for new users. John, you might as well go after this one.
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways you can buy it, I guess. I'll talk about three. So the three are through an exchange, through a chat room, and local Bitcoins, I guess. Or, yeah, maybe the chat room, I shouldn't even call it chat room, just like P2P over the internet,
right,
over the counter, online. So the first one, the exchange, that's probably going to be one of the easier things to do if you're just starting out, I think. There is some stuff that you have to go through that some people might complain about, but I don't think it's really a big deal. I have used Coinbase. I know Daniel and Tim, who's not here, have used Coinbase. It's a pretty popular site, and a lot of people use it. You have to link it to your bank account, and there's all kinds of verification with that. You have to have IDs and stuff like that. And then they'll send a really small deposit into your bank account. It'll be a couple cents, and you have to verify how much it was so they can check that this is actually your bank account and everything like that. So there are a few steps to go through to get that set up. But once you do, you have this account that's linked to your bank account. So you pretty much just click a button that says buy Bitcoins. It asks you how much you want to buy, how many Bitcoins you want to buy, and then it tells you how much that's going to be in US dollars, and then you just confirm, and it would take it straight out of whatever account you linked. And if you choose to sell Bitcoin on there, it's the same thing. Sell Bitcoin, put in how much you want to sell. It'll tell you how much you're going to get out in dollars. Oh, and they have an exchange rate like posted on the site too. That even before you type stuff in, you could figure out based on how much you want to sell, how much you're going to get back. But yeah, then it'll deposit it straight into your account.
Okay, so here's a question that I want to ask. Suppose I'm buying Bitcoin and I'm trying to buy it through, let's say, Coinbase. Do I have to buy like an actual one whole Bitcoin that's worth like $620, or can I buy little amounts at a small time? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. They do let you buy partial Bitcoins, and that is really important. We try to talk about that a lot because that seems to be a barrier for some people, and really it's just that they don't realize how it works. But people are like, well, I don't want to buy Bitcoin because it's $620. You could spend 5 cents on a Bitcoin if you wanted to. Now, that would be kind of stupid because if you're using Coinbase, you have to pay fees and stuff, so you want to buy enough to make it worth your while. But yeah, you could buy $10 worth, you could buy 5 Bitcoins, you could buy however much you want. Yeah, we've actually seen a lot of sites shift to using millibitcoins instead of bitcoins. You just move the decimal place 3 points to the right, and you have millibitcoins. And I think, does Coinbase let you change that yet?
Well, actually, I don't know if Coinbase gives you the option. I'm not sure.
I know if you use some wallets let you like switch between millibitcoins and bitcoins.
I feel like they have to. Let me see if I can figure it out. Oh yeah, there it is. Bitcoin units. Oh no, they don't even have millibits. They go straight from bitcoins to bits. Bits are the same thing as a micro Bitcoin. It is 1/1,000,000th of a Bitcoin. So yeah, they give you the option of either straight up Bitcoins or bits.
Yeah, and there are some other places that I've used that you can choose millibitcoins.
I just want to throw in here, just with Coinbase. Well, first of all, I completely agree with everything John said about the whole barrier thing and how people don't realize that you can buy any amount of Bitcoin that you want. And then also I just wanted to say that in terms of Coinbase, that is what I tell people. If you're in the US and if you're not too concerned about remaining anonymous, if you don't mind linking up your bank account, then Coinbase is by far the easiest way to go. So definitely try that out. And I will also throw in, we're going to add another redirect for youmeandbtc.com/Coinbase if you want to sign up there, because they have a referral system, and we will both actually. If you enter through that referral redirection, then once you buy at least $100 worth of Bitcoin, both of us are going to get an extra $5 worth of Bitcoin added to our account. So if you want to enter through youmeandbtc.com/Coinbase, buy $100 worth and you'll get $5 extra free if you want to do that.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll move on to the next way to buy Bitcoins if you're new. I guess, yeah, the next way I'll talk about is we'll talk about specifically the OTC channel. It's an IRC channel. Daniel uses it a lot. I was on there for a little bit, but I don't think I ever actually traded anything, and I haven't been on there for a while. But yeah, it's basically just a chat room where you find other people who are willing to trade with you, and you can pick how you want to trade. You could trade silver for Bitcoin. I know Daniel's done that before. You could trade dollars. You could trade really anything that you want to. You could trade any currency you want for Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, really. But yeah, you just find someone else who's willing to trade with you. It can be a little bit hard to get into that because they have a rating system called the Web of Trust, and Daniel can talk about that if he wants to.
Right.
You could read about it. But that might be hard for a beginner to get into because it's going to be hard to establish trust there. But if you really want to, and especially if you want to try to be more anonymous with your Bitcoin or to try to stay off the grid a little bit more, that might be a better place to start. Yeah, is there anything you want to say about that, Daniel?
Yeah, I would basically agree. It can be a little bit difficult to get started because you have to build up some trust and everything. But yeah, if you want to remain anonymous, that might be a good way to go, because it's not really like, it's not like Coinbase where they're going to keep a record of all your transactions or anything. They accept all different kinds of payment methods because really it's just person to person. So if you find somebody who's going to accept cash in the mail, you can trade with them. If you find somebody who's going to accept PayPal, trade with them. If you find somebody who wants to accept silver, however you want to trade, it's up to the different people. You could do a cash deposit. Any number of payment methods are available there. So whatever you use, you can probably, it might take a little bit of digging, and that's another reason that it might be a little more difficult for new people, because you might have to search around a little bit for someone who can work with you. But theoretically, any payment method you can think of could be used on Bitcoin OTC. So that's, if anybody wants to go there, it's bitcoin-otc.com, and you can just enter the chat room straight from that website.
Yeah, it's also, maybe I should mention that that's not the only way that you could trade over the counter on the internet. It's just convenient because there's a bunch of people in one place.
Right, and actually, local Bitcoins is pretty similar. It's a little bit more centralized, but you might mention that.
Well, you can go for that.
Yeah, so local Bitcoins, I haven't used them a ton. I've just browsed the site a little bit, but it's actually really similar in that you can do pretty much any kind of payment method. They have some pretty good search tools where you can search for people who will accept PayPal or whatever. And so yeah, it's pretty similar in that it's just people making listings for what they will accept and what their rates are and stuff, and you find a person who will accept your trade and you trade with them. So it's pretty similar like that. But another cool thing, kind of the way that local Bitcoins got started, was that it was intended that you would actually meet people in person. That's why it's called local. You would go up to someone in person and literally trade them cash, and they would send you Bitcoins. So you can do that there too, which I guess you could do that on the IRC channel as well, but that's another option. So yeah, you can look up local Bitcoins.
Yeah, really, you could find somebody, though, just what I was saying, it could be anywhere. Maybe you'll find somebody on Reddit or something. There's a Bitcoin
definitely
space on Reddit, or maybe you're on some forum for something else. and there's a Bitcoin subsection or something like that. Or maybe you find somebody on Facebook. And I guess I should say you could find people on there to just meet up in person and trade too, and you could just pay them in cash on the spot.
Another thing that I would recommend for beginners is actually to see if you can find online a Bitcoin meetup in your area, because
I was going to say that, yeah.
we haven't actually been able to make it to any of those yet, but I've heard that, first of all, you can just meet people and get information about Bitcoin, but also I've heard that they are really great places for buying and selling Bitcoin as well. So yeah, I would look that up, see if you can find a Bitcoin meetup in your area, and just go there, meet people, trade Bitcoin if you want to, and that should be pretty helpful.
Yeah, you'll just have to do a Google search. Backing up a little bit, I think maybe I should say something about Purse.io for the exchange section. This is actually maybe, I haven't used it to buy Bitcoin, but I think it might even be easier than Coinbase. There's a website called Purse.io, and it's actually a really awesome website. Everyone on the show has used it, and we love it. And we have had Andrew Lee on the show. He's co-founder of it.
Not quite a founder, but
okay.
he works for them.
Yeah, he's yeah. So what it is basically is people post wish lists from Amazon on Purse's website, and they have a pretty neat system where how it shows up and you select to buy stuff. But basically, this is also a great way to spend Bitcoins too, I should say that, because that's how I've used it. And yeah, I love it. I'm just going to say that straight up. I love Purse. I use it as much as I can. So somebody posts their wish list on there, and they actually choose a discount. And this is maybe where Coinbase will have an advantage, is that, well, okay, so somebody buys your wish list that you post on there with a credit card, and you pay them in Bitcoin. That's where the exchange part comes in, and Purse has their own wallet. And so if you want to buy Bitcoins, this is a way to do it, and you just use a credit card. I think one of their selling points on this is that you don't need to go through all these verification steps like you would on Coinbase, and you don't have to give them your bank account or anything. You just pay for it with a credit card like you would on Amazon. And the person who's buying the Bitcoin pays for the discount that the person who put the wish list on there stated beforehand, who put it in their wish list order, I guess, on Purse. So that the disadvantage is that you have to pay a little bit of an upcharge to get your Bitcoin, which translates into saving for the person spending Bitcoin. So I don't know, if you buy Bitcoin on there and spend it on there, you could come out even. But the advantage is that it's a lot easier than Coinbase or another exchange like that.
Right. Credit cards are pretty convenient. It used to be hard to buy Bitcoin with a credit card just because it's so easy to charge back with a credit card, and there are no chargebacks with Bitcoin, so it was really risky to accept credit card for Bitcoin. But yeah, you can do it through Purse.io. It's a little hard to explain, like John was trying to do. If you wanted to put it in one sentence, if you're buying Bitcoin through Purse, basically you get paid in Bitcoin for buying things on Amazon for someone else. That's how I would put it in one sentence.
Oh, I understand now. Okay, I get it. I want to try that now.
Yeah, you get paid in Bitcoin. I'll say it again. You get paid in Bitcoin for buying things on Amazon for someone else. So that's how it works. And I will also add a redirection for that. If you want to go to umeandbtc.com/purse, we have a referral for that too. If you're willing, you could use that to sign up for Purse.
Yeah, and like I said, Purse is, I haven't used them to buy Bitcoin, but if I really just wanted to use a credit card, I think it would be, I mean, I've saved money on there and stuff, and I love buying stuff on Amazon on there because I use Amazon a lot, and it's awesome to be able to use Bitcoin, and it's awesome to be able to get the discount. If I really needed some Bitcoin, I would be willing to pay for somebody else to get a discount because I've gotten discounts, and because it's awesome to just have the Bitcoin. You're contributing to the economy. You could think of it that way, because you're getting people to spend Bitcoin and you're circulating money through the whole economy. So yeah, it's just a great idea.
Definitely. And normally the discount is at least 10%, anywhere from 10 to 20, 25%. You can set it whatever you want. And so it's a pretty significant discount too. It's not just like 1% back or anything.
Well, we should say it's not whatever you want. It used to be, but they recently, with a newer update, they put a cap on it. I think it's like 33 or 35%.
Right. Yeah, so, I think 33.
Yeah, so you can't put it anything, but 33 is a pretty big discount. And obviously, the lower your discount is, the faster your order is going to get taken. And actually, that reminds me, they just added a new feature called VIP. And if you do 10% or less, they guarantee that your order will be bought within 24 hours. And if somebody doesn't take the order, Purse actually takes it themselves.
Cool. Yeah, I think we can call the episode there then. This was Winter Trabex, the Bitcoin beginner. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for all your wonderful questions.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of the YMB and BTC podcast. All of the music in today's show was from John Stewart. Don't forget to check out liberty.me. Remember that if you use the promo code YMB, you'll get $5 off. We'll see you next Thursday.